We continue to look at Omote Gyaku.
This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed.
So we continue our shout out to Open Budo and bring out some more ideas how to train Omote Gyaku. In one of our last videos, we looked at the mechanics of Omote Gyaku. Now we want to look at 3 training aspects concerning this wrist lock / forearm twist. If you don't know what I'm talking about concerning what's here more than a wrist lock, please have a look in the first video of this series. If you have not seen Open Budo's videos about how to improve our training for Omote Gyaku, please have a look there as well. I will link all these in the description box. What do we want to look at right now? Yeah, we want to look at 3 aspects of training Omote Gyaku. Number 1, how do you remember all of these fancy wrist locks if you start a new martial arts? Usually you have to learn them one by one, and that's not very effective. In many cases, people will remember some of them and forget some others. Therefore, when we teach wrist locks, we usually don't teach them as separate techniques. We teach them as chains. So several different locks that form a single motion, in the sense of we don't change the grip on the hand of the opponent, we change our relative position to the opponent. That might happen because we are moving due to an outer disturbance, for example a second attacker, or could mean the opponent tries to escape from our lock and therefore we get into a new position and factually into a new lock. We will have separate videos describing some of these chains. Here are just some examples, so sections from these chains where you can see that Omote Gyaku is included in these. And what you can also see, you can train this as a simple remembrance support, in the sense of you start the chain and then you go through each of the different locks step by step without having a real reason to do that. Or you can actively move the opponent because for a tactical situation, or as Open Budo suggested, you can play with the opponent, giving you some additional attacks, and then you see in which new situation you pop up. Tricky point here is you will often end up in other techniques than Omote Gyaku. For us, this is totally what we expect. We want to have all these wrist locks interconnected with each other. If you want to train specifically Omote Gyaku, this can of course be something that distracts you from that route, but we think training chains of wrist locks, and therefore several wrist locks together, is much more effective, and you will recognize a lot of other wrist locks here from the Bujinkan. Of course, we have things like Ura Gyaku, Take Ori, and some others that I don't know the Bujinkan name, but you would probably recognize some of these from Jiu-Jitsu or Aikido, like Sankacho. Often these wrist locks have several names, and sometimes one name means different techniques. We already had that for Omote Gyaku. Omote Gyaku is in principle 4 different techniques, but these chains definitely are an effective way of remembering all of them. We usually differentiate 64 different wrist locks, and without the chains it would be really hard to distinguish them and remember them. With the chains we can always go into the chain and simply reconstruct some that we've forgotten. The chains are already a useful training tool. Another important aspect is, and that has been mentioned in the comment section in some of the videos already, how do I get there? How do I effectively get to an Omote Gyaku grip in the first place? Because if we look at the kata, it takes quite a long time until you reach the point where you have control. And then of course the question is always, hey, can we not simply do sparring? But we already know if we do sparring, we usually use some type of protection, so gloves. And when we are wearing gloves and our training partners wearing gloves, wrist locks get challenging at best. Some of these gloves have even a stabilization for the wrist, which means wrist locks don't happen when you do sparring with gloves. Alternative ways of training entrances into wrist locks is, for example, using drills. This one shown here is the classical drill from Filipino martial arts, also known as Hubat Lubat. In Germany, you can find this thing under the term Dreierkontakt, which means 3 contacts. We usually call it the 4-step drill. In Japanese, this thing is usually called Teba no Waza. You can see it easily derives exercise from different kata, also from Bujinkan kata. And from these, you can then train in a flow to reach the grips. It's not the same as doing sparring, but at least it's beyond the kata and it requires controlled situations how you can grasp the hand without being attacked with the second hand. A similar type of exercise that goes in the same directions would of course be sticky hands. And sticky hands is of course something that we especially have in a lot of Chinese styles like in Wing Chun. We also have it to a certain degree in Filipino martial arts, and depending with whom you train Japanese martial arts, you would also learn that. In the schools where I learned Bujinkan, we also had different forms of sticky hands. And to be honest, if we are precise, sticky hands and these types of drills that we just looked at, so Teba no Waza, they are in fact just a continuum of the same idea. It's often also that from sticky hands we end up in something like Teba no Waza or the other way around. Both of them are training forms that you can start with to try to get into the different wrist locks and later on also in other types of locks, of course, but especially for Omote Gyaku, the sticky hands seems to work quite well. And then as a third point, I want to talk about a training concept that I really like, and it's called active learning. Active learning means you take knowledge that you already have and you transfer it to a new situation. By that, you can find yourself new techniques or new variations of techniques that you did not know before, and you found them yourself. And that's a difference to if somebody shows you the thing. Because if you find it yourself, then it's deeper engraved into your brain. And I already indicated that with the chains, it will also help you. If you forget one of the 64 techniques, for example, you can always recover it by the knowledge that you have and go, for example, through the chains. And I make here a simple example for how we could transfer knowledge. So if we look at the motion, one of the kata motions that we can use to get into Omote Gyaku, we can also use to get into Ura Gyaku. Simply, we have to shift the attacking arm. You can see that here. The defending person is doing the same motion. The attacker is once attacking with right, once with left. We once end up in Omote Gyaku and we once end up in Ura Gyaku. And now the interesting thing is we have in the Bujinkan curriculum a lot of variations of Ura Gyaku. Some of them have gotten even special names like Hon Gyaku. And they work with an interesting principle because the wrist lock is twisting the forearm joint and then the shoulder takes over the rotation. These details have been discussed in the last videos. You can check out that. The pain can be increased by simply applying a little bit of pressure on the elbow, which prohibits the rotation of the shoulder. So the pain stays, in fact, in the forearm region. And this is well developed for Ura Gyaku. You can now see as Omote Gyaku is just the other side, so to say, of Ura Gyaku, we can transfer all these methods that we have from Ura Gyaku also to Omote Gyaku, including twisting the forearm, pressing against the elbow, dragging on the fingers from below, even involving the sideways locking of the wrist lock. That is, by the way, one of the techniques that can be seen in some of the early Steven Seagal movies. In this way, you can find variations of Omote Gyaku that you would usually have to specifically learn in long sessions, but we have this knowledge already from Ura Gyaku, and by this you can actively explore them yourself. There are just 3 ideas how to improve your training for Omote Gyaku. They are not seen as alternatives to what Open Budo has already suggested. This is seen as an add-on on that and some other views that you can in addition train to the way that they suggested it. Hope you like some of the ideas, hope this gave you some inspiration, and hope to see you around next time.